I became the cannon fodder Duchess who was meant to be exiled in Chapter 40, so why is the future empress obsessed with me and cuddling me in my bed calling me wifey? I locked eyes with her by accident. Across the study hall, between rows of polished desks and towering shelves of books that smelled of ink and old paper, Serafina Vale stood near the tall windows. Sunlight spilled in reflecting on her long blonde hair as it flowed down her back, as if the world itself had decided to be gentle with her. Her green eyes were wide and beautiful, framed by her delicate lashes. They scanned the room before settling on me. Evelyn Moore. The villainess. Who was never meant to be more than a problem. She looked exactly like the illustrations I remembered from the novel. No. Better. The student council uniform fit her perfectly, like it belonged to her in a way nothing had ever truly belonged to me. She looked kind and untouchable. She was the heroine and I was the obstacle. My fingers curled against the edge of the desk as jealousy of her stardom kicked in. I had transmigrated into a novel. A romance I had once read half asleep, never imagining it would become my reality. In this story, Serafina Vale and the Crown Prince, James Aldrich, were destined to fall in love. Their love would be praised, written about, celebrated. It would change the academy, the kingdom, everything. And Evelyn Moore, James's fiancée in name, existed only to stand in their way. To be jealous and humiliated, eventually to be discarded. I knew every beat of the story. I knew how Evelyn Moore, a girl with status, but no warmth, filled with pride, arrogance, was written to lose. A background tragedy dressed as a lesson. Evelyn. James's voice cut through my thoughts and pulled me back into the room. I blinked, the image of Serafina burning itself into the back of my mind, and turned toward him. James stood near the front, posture straight, expression composed in that practiced way of his. The Crown Prince. The male lead. The axis this world revolved around. Apologies, he continued, tone formal, distant in a way that would have hurt the original Evelyn. There's been a change. I already knew what he was going to say. You no longer need to take up the role of tutor. Serafina has volunteered. Her grades are considerably higher. The study hall seemed too quiet. I remembered the scene. This was where Evelyn Moore would smile and then, unable to bear it, challenge Serafina. She would compare their knowledge. She would try to reclaim the spotlight she believed was hers. And she would lose. Badly, with a score of 9-1. Laughter. Whispers. Humiliation dressed up as narrative justice. I let it pass. I looked at James, then past him to Serafina. She hadn't smiled. She looked uncertain, almost hesitant, as if she hadn't volunteered out of ambition but obligation. As if she was already apologizing without words. Interesting. Okay. James paused, clearly not expecting that. I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm. Then I hope Serafina can improve my grades as well. A ripple went through the room. Surprise. Disappointment. Confusion. I gathered my books, stood, and walked toward the doors. As I passed Serafina, I felt her gaze on me again, warm and searching, like she was trying to understand something that didn't match the story she thought she was living in. I didn't look back and simply went to my next class. The science lab smelled like alcohol wipes and heated metal. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, glinting off glassware lined in perfect rows. White coats rustled. Stools scraped softly against the floor. This was another scene I remembered far too well. Pair up, the instructor said. In the original story, this was predictable. Serafina would walk straight to James, the Crown Prince, the only person who had treated her kindly after her family fell into ruin. They would stand together, heads bent close, murmuring over measurements and formulas. And the old Evelyn would see it as a provocation. I stood still, hands folded. Well, not this time. I had already promised myself that. No fits. No accusations. No desperate attempts to cling to a man who was never truly mine. I waited. Groups began to form around me, friends calling out to one another, laughter breaking the sterile quietness of the lab. I watched James out of the corner of my eye, already bracing myself for the familiar sight of Serafina moving toward him. Instead, I heard my name. Evelyn. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I turned. Serafina Vale stood a few steps away, goggles hanging loosely around her neck, green eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't immediately describe, maybe calm or maybe almost nervous. Me? Before I could process what was happening, she gently took my wrist. "Our station's over here," she said, already dragging me along. My mind completely left my body. I stumbled after her, my thoughts scattering like papers caught in a draft. This isn't right. This isn't supposed to happen. You don't choose me. You choose him. By the time we reached our assigned desk, my heart was racing far faster than the situation unfolded. Serafina let go and immediately turned her attention to the lab tools, adjusting the stand, checking the clamps, lining everything up with efficiency. Her movements were perfect. I stared at her hands, long fingers tightening screws. I forced myself to ask her, "Serafina, why did you choose me?" She paused, just briefly, then continued working. "I'm uncomfortable partnering with people who don't know how to handle lab equipment," she said matter-of-factly. I blinked. That was not what I expected. "Oh," I replied weakly. If only she knew. If only she knew that Evelyn Moore was terrible with lab equipment. The original Evelyn had avoided practical classes whenever possible, relying on theory and tutors, hands too tense, too untrained. And I, despite my memories from another life, had not magically inherited confidence, not that I was any better at practicals than Evelyn. The experiment progressed in careful steps. Measure. Heat. Observe. I followed Serafina's instructions closely, nodding, trying not to bother with the unease crawling up my spine. Halfway through, she handed me a glass container, already a bit warm, and gestured toward the extension tool. "Hold this steady, I'll adjust the temperature," she said. I did as told. At least, I tried to. The heat seeped through faster than I expected. My hands trembled. My grip loosened just enough for disaster to bloom. The glass slipped. I didn't feel pain. No burning. No sharp shock. Instead, I felt an arm around my waist, sudden and firm, pulling me backward into solid warmth. Another hand came over mine, shielding me as the glass jar clattered onto the table, hot liquid splashing harmlessly away from my body. My breath vanished. Serafina stood between me and the mess, her body angled protectively, her sleeve damp where the liquid had splashed. Her hand had taken the brunt from it. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately. I couldn't answer. All I could feel was where she was touching me. Too close. I grabbed her wrist, the one still resting at my waist, and my panic finally found a voice. I'm fine. But your hand." Without waiting for her response, I tugged her toward me and then abruptly let go, stepping back as if distance alone could calm the chaos in my chest. "We should get that checked," I blurted out. "The infirmary. Just in case." Before she could argue, I turned and hurried out of the lab. The hallway outside the infirmary was quiet, echoing faintly with distant footsteps. I pressed my back against the wall and finally let myself think. What if she thinks I did it on purpose? What if she thinks this was revenge? What if the story twists this into another reason to condemn me? I stared at my shaking hands. I hadn't meant to cause harm. I hadn't meant to be close. But the warmth of her touch lingered anyway. In the infirmary, white curtains muted the sunlight and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and dried herbs. I stood beside the bed with my hands clasped too tightly in front of me, listening as the nurse spoke. "Her hand shouldn't be used much for a while," she said, adjusting the bandage around Serafina's right wrist. "Since it's her dominant hand, daily tasks will be difficult. Writing, lifting, even dressing, she'll need assistance." I lowered my head, my gaze fixed on the clean tiles beneath my feet. Guilt pulled in my chest. It didn't matter that Serafina had stepped in on her own. The injury existed because of me. "I understand," I murmured, though the nurse had already turned away. Before I could retreat further into my thoughts, I felt a light tug at the hem of my skirt. I looked up. Serafina was watching me, her uninjured hand resting weakly on the bed. Her face was pale, lashes damp, the corners of her eyes tinged red as if she had cried and tried very hard to hide it. Against the stark white sheets, she looked painfully fragile. I really can't manage on my own like this, she said softly. Her voice wavered just enough to make my heart ache. And since it happened while we were partnered, it's only fair you take care of me, right? Fair. I nodded far too quickly. Of course I will. I promise. Only then did I realize how clearly I could see her flushed cheeks, the slight tremble of her lips when she breathed. She was beautiful like this in a way that felt unfair. And the thought slipped in uninvited. How much prettier would she look if she smiled instead? The idea startled me enough that I stepped back, heat rushing to my face. Later that afternoon, my professor summoned me with a tone that left little room for refusal. With graduation approaching, adjustments must be made, he said. Serafina will stay in your room until her injury heals. It's practical. I nodded again, apparently very good at that today. Helping her move in was easy. She didn't have much. A small suitcase, a few books, neatly folded uniforms. I carried most of her things while she followed, offering apologies that only made my chest ache more with guilt. Halfway through, my throat grew dry. I set a box down and turned, scanning the room. I'm going to drink some water. Before I could take a step, something cold pressed against my back. I jumped forward. Serafina laughed, startled me more. Our young lady sure is overworked, she said, holding out the glass. I took it, my fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment, and drank far too quickly. I could feel her gaze on me, following the movement of my throat as I swallowed. I cleared my throat. And whose stuff is this? I asked, gesturing to a stack of clothes. Serafina raised one eyebrow, then deliberately lowered her gaze to my waist. A small, knowing smirk curved her lips. Well, she said lightly, whose fault was that? She looked straight into my eyes. My brain stopped working. I turned away so fast I nearly knocked over a chair, mumbling something unintelligent as I focused very hard on moving boxes that no longer needed moving. When everything was finally done, I collapsed onto my bed, staring up at the ceiling, exhaustion seeping into my bones. Why did I bring this upon myself? I wondered. I had wanted to stay out of the story, to stay distant, to survive quietly. Instead, I had invited the heroine into my room, my space, my life. And, somehow, lying there with my heart beating too fast, all I could think was, this is going to ruin me. I am hungry, my lady. I stared at her. She sat on the edge of the bed, injured hand carefully supported, expression calm and expectant, like this outcome had already been decided in her head. Somewhere deep inside me, a very tired part of my soul gave up. All right, I said, dragging the word out as I stood. My body protested immediately. Every muscle ached, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. Still, I reached for her and guided her up. Let's go before you starve dramatically. She smiled. That alone should have been my warning. The cafeteria was loud voices overlapping, trays clattering, the smell of warm food filling the air. I maneuvered us through the crowd, collected what she wanted, what I wanted, and set everything neatly on the table. I sat down, lifted my spoon, and as I was about to take my first bite, clink! Serafina's spoon slipped from her fingers and landed softly against the tray. She froze, then slowly lowered her gaze to her bowl. Her shoulders drooped just a little. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to be devastating. I guess, she murmured, voice barely audible. I can't manage. I closed my eyes. A long, slow, frustrated sigh escaped me. Fine, I muttered. I picked up my spoon, scooped a careful bite, and held it out to her. She looked up, eyes wide, lashes fluttering like she hadn't planned this. She opened her mouth. I fed her. And that was how it started. Every day blurred into the next. Feeding her meals, spoon by spoon. Helping her bathe while staring resolutely at the wall and pretending my face wasn't burning. Changing her clothes with hands that shook more than I liked to admit. Replacing sheets, washing uniforms, folding fabric that still carried her warmth. I told myself it was temporary. And being responsible. 2 weeks passed. And somewhere along the way, I began to notice the cracks in the original story. Serafina Vale, the novel's gentle heroine, had been written as a pushover. Kind to the point of erasing herself. Quiet. grateful for scraps of affection. This Serafina? She gave instructions without hesitation. She met people's eyes when she spoke. She ordered things around. And James. In the novel, this was when romance bloomed. Lingering glances. Shared laughter. A bond forged through shared loneliness. But now, whenever James appeared, Serafina's interest vanished entirely. Polite. Distant. Her attention always drifted back to me, like a compass needle pulled by something stronger. I sat beside her on the bed that night, lost in thought, exhaustion dragging my mind into overthinking. What if the story had already changed too much? What if I was the variable? Suddenly, a hand tightened around my waist. I gasped as I was pulled sideways, my body tilting until I landed against something warm and solid. Her. Somehow, I had become the pillow of the heroine. Serafina's arm curled around me, her head resting against my shoulder. I didn't move. I couldn't wake a resting cat. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it in her dream like a drum. I stared down at her face, relaxed, peaceful, lashes resting against flushed cheeks. Too close. Far too close. Heat rushed to my face as I carefully closed my eyes, telling myself to calm down. Just sleep, this means nothing. I told myself. My consciousness faded slowly. I didn't feel her shift. But she did. Serafina opened her eyes and looked at me. She studied my face in the dim light, then leaned in just enough to press a soft kiss against my forehead. Her fingers brushed through a few loose strands of my hair. She inhaled quietly, like she was committing my scent to her memory. Another kiss was planted by her this time on my hair. Then she settled back against me, eyes closing once more. And I slept, unaware that the heroine had already become twisted. Unease crept in, it settled in my chest during ordinary moments, when Serafina laughed too close, when her hand brushed mine for no reason at all, when James's presence no longer shifted the air between us the way the novel insisted it should. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining the divergence because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if the story strayed too far. So I did what I thought was sensible. I began setting things up. Small accidents. Coincidences. Moments where Serafina would happen to run into James, outside the library, near the courtyard, at the edge of the training grounds. Just enough exposure for the story to remember itself. Just enough for fate to take over. I told myself I was her friend now. Friends helped each other find their destined paths. And if the heroine fell in love like she was supposed to, maybe the world would stop sharpening its knife for me if we became best friends. But nothing worked. James smiled. He greeted her warmly. Serafina responded with politeness and nothing else. Her eyes never followed him when he left. Her voice never softened. She never looked back. Each failed attempt tightened the knot in my stomach. By the time I came up with the latter idea, I was desperate. It was ridiculous in hindsight. Straight out of a cliché scene. I positioned the ladder carefully between the tall shelves, calculated the angle, and waited until James was walking down the aisle. All Serafina had to do was climb, slip, and fall into his arms. I peeked through the shelves. James passed by. Serafina climbed down. Without slipping. Without stumbling. I stared, dumbfounded. Before I could process my failure, I climbed the ladder myself, irritation clouding my judgment. My foot missed a step. I braced myself for the floor and closed my eyes. Instead, I was caught. Arms wrapped around me, pulling me close. For a split second, everything went quiet. I found myself staring straight into Serafina's eyes. Time froze, like it always did in novels. Then a book fell from the shelf and hit her square on the head. I burst out laughing. Serafina laughed too then. Let go of me entirely, and I fell down with a small thud. We were still laughing when the teacher arrived. Our punishment was having 10 points off our grades for damaging school property. Walking back, I tried very hard not to look at her. On the way, her shoulders still shook with leftover laughter. Her presence felt closer than before. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my wrist and I was pulled into an empty staff room, the door slamming shut behind us. The lock clicked. Serafina stood in front of me, closer than she had ever been, one arm braced against the wall beside my head. My back pressed flat against the cool surface, heart racing. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Have you been trying so hard to set me up with James?" I opened my mouth, but then I closed it. She waited. My voice failed me. I looked away. Her fingers tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Evelyn," she said, eyes searching mine, "have you ever considered my feelings?" The room felt too small. "I don't like being pushed toward a man I'm uncomfortable with," she continued. "Not by the world. And not by you." Her grip loosened, but she didn't step back. "I thought we were friends." I swallowed, as I didn't know what that meant for either of us. My chest felt too tight, too loud, too full of things I had been carefully avoiding naming. Serafina was still standing too close for comfort, too close for lies, and the silence between us had turned heavy, pressing against my ribs. If I didn't say something now, I knew I never would. I would keep pushing her toward James, keep hiding behind the plot, keep pretending ignorance was safe. Before my courage could evaporate, I reached out and gripped her hand. She was startled, her eyes flicking down to where our fingers were tangled, then back up to my face. My voice sounded strange. "Do you prefer tablets or laptops?" The words sounded ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. Serafina just stared at me. Then, without hesitation, "Laptops," she said. And then she pulled me into a hug. Something inside me shattered. I laughed and cried at the same time, the sound ugly and unrestrained as my face pressed into her shoulder. All the fear I had been hoarding spilled out, fear of the plot, fear of death flags, fear of wanting something I wasn't supposed to have. Her hand moved slowly over my back, soothing and grounding. "It's okay," she murmured. "I've got you." I cried harder. When I finally pulled back, my eyes burned and my face felt swollen. My reflection in the dusty window caught me off guard. I really did look ridiculous. Serafina tilted her head, studying me with mocking seriousness. "A face only a mother would love," she said. I puffed out my cheeks, immediately offended. "Hey." And she added softly, "A face I love too." Heat rushed up my neck, my cheeks burning so fiercely I was sure I could light a candle with them. Serafina looked just as flustered, lips parted slightly as if she hadn't meant to say it aloud. I swallowed. When I asked quietly, "Did you feel that way?" She didn't hesitate. "I woke up in this world just a few days before the academy started. When I saw you during the student council speech, I thought I wanted to know you. I said, my voice trembling, when I saw you at the start of the novel's first chapter. I thought you were very pretty." Her fingers tightened around mine. "And now?" I panicked. "Now I think you're pretty stupid." I blurted out. Her eyebrows shot up. I immediately buried my face into her chest, mortified, my entire face burning red all the way down my neck. "That's not what I meant." She laughed, the sound vibrating through her, and wrapped her arms around me again. I stayed there, hiding, until my heart calmed enough for me to think. Then slowly, I lifted my head. Her lips were right there. I leaned in, eyes half closed, cheeks puffed like a pufferfish and trying very hard to be brave. Knock knock. We jumped apart like criminals. "Is anyone in there?" A teacher's voice called. "Yes." We answered in unison, far too loudly. We scrambled, smoothed our clothes, opened the door, and bolted down the hallway, fingers still interlocked, laughter spilling out of us in embarrassment. Life became gentle. Serafina and I slipped into a rhythm that felt natural far too quickly, like we had been practicing for it long before this lifetime. We woke early, before the academy grounds filled with noise, and walked together while the morning mist still clung to the grass. Sometimes she would bring 2 cups of warm milk from the kitchen, and we would sit on the stone steps near the fountain, shoulders brushing as the water reflected the pale sky. On days we had free time, we sneaked out to the nearby street markets. The Celestial Festival was held from day to night. We were getting dressed when I felt her eyes on me. I turned, confused, only to find Serafina staring like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Before I could ask what was wrong, she crossed the room in 3 steps and swept me up into her arms. "Serafina," I gasped as a kiss shut me up. By the time I realized we were late, my thoughts were thoroughly scrambled and my lips felt swollen. Every time I tried to pull away, she kissed me again, laughing softly against my skin like time didn't matter. By the time we arrived at the festival, I was both annoyed and flustered. That was when a child pointed at me. "Mom," he said loudly, tugging on his mother's sleeve, "look. That girl must have burnt her lips. They look like a fish's mouth." The world ended. I dragged Serafina behind a stall and hit her on the back, face burning. "This is your fault." She laughed so hard she had to hold on to me to stay upright. The rest of the night blurred into warmth and color. Lanterns swayed overhead. Music drifted through the streets. Serafina bought me everything I even glanced at twice, a teddy bear nearly as big as me, a sparkly princess tiara she insisted I wear, snacks stacked into my arms because of buy one get one free. "You're spoiling me," I protested weakly. She smiled. "I know." When I was nibbling on roasted honey-covered chocolate candy hawks, she leaned closer. "I want a bite." Before I could respond, she took one, straight from my mouth. "Tastes good." I froze. My heart nearly burst out of my body. I glanced around, relieved no one seemed to be watching, then leaned in and kissed her again, quick and soft, my face burning all over. Finals crept up on us. Serafina and I spent the morning wandering through the academy dorms, a neatly folded list in my hand, names crossed out one by one as we collected assignments. She carried the stack, arms slowly filling with papers, folders, and reports. Every time someone added another, I worried she'd drop them, but she only smiled and adjusted her grip. When we were finally done, exhaustion settled into my bones all at once. "Let's go," Serafina said, tilting her head toward the academy gates. "There's a new cafe off campus." The cafe was warm and softly lit, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. I went to wash my hands, still thinking about upcoming exams, formulas, and dates tangling in my head. When I returned to the table, Serafina was already seated. 2 drinks. 2 small plates. Affogato and a macchiato. My favorites. She looked up, smiled, and slid one cup toward me without comment. I stared at it for half a second too long before sitting down. I never told her, not once. But I said nothing. I just took a sip. That night, back in the dorm, books surrounded me like a fortress. Notes were scattered everywhere, my handwriting growing messier by the page. I rubbed my eyes, frustration creeping in. I wished for the guidebook I used in my first life. The one that broke things down gently, that felt like a patient hand guiding mine. I hadn't realized how much I missed it until now. "Eve," Serafina said softly. I looked up. She held out a book. My breath caught. It wasn't the same, but it was close. Similar structure. Familiar explanations. When I opened it, I was shocked. The pages were filled with handwritten notes. "For you." I made it easier to follow. Joy exploded in my chest. I launched myself at her without thinking, wrapping my arms around her neck. "Serafina, I love you. I will cook for you every day. I'll make you so much food you'll turn into the cutest little piglet." She laughed, genuinely startled, hugging me back. "Evelyn, breathe." "I can't," I declared seriously, pulling back just enough to look at her. "I am overwhelmed with gratitude and devotion." We studied together after that, shoulders pressed close, occasionally whispering questions, sharing quiet smiles. Hours slipped by unnoticed. At some point, my eyes grew too heavy. I must have drifted off mid-sentence. When Serafina looked at me then, her heart felt unbearably full. She reached out, gently brushing my hair away from my face, her touch careful, like I might disappear if she wasn't gentle enough. She kissed my forehead softly. "Eve," she whispered, voice thick with something deeper than relief, "I am so grateful to have found you again." She lifted me carefully and carried me to the bed, tucking the blankets around us both. I curled closer towards her, seeking her warmth. As sleep claimed us both. The preparation holidays were given to all students, and I invited Serafina to my duchy. She agreed without hesitation, fingers lacing with mine. The carriage rocked gently as we passed beyond the academy roads, wheels humming against stone and dirt. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Halfway through the journey she spoke. Evelyn, are you really okay with telling your parents about us? I didn't answer right away. I am, I said finally. And if they don't agree, if they turn their backs on us, we'll be fine. We'll live somewhere else. Quietly. Happily. I don't need a title to survive. What I didn't say was the part that twisted inside me like a thorn. These people aren't my parents. Not really. They belong to the original Evelyn. I carried her body, her name, her duties, but not her childhood memories, not her blood-bound love. Serafina squeezed my hand, as if she sensed the fracture. Whatever happens, she said softly, I'm with you. The duchy gates rose before us not long after, white stone, silver banners, painfully familiar from a life that wasn't mine. My heart pounded as the carriage slowed. My parents greeted us at the entrance. My mother smiled first, composed and graceful. My father nodded, sharp-eyed and assessing. And then, a small figure peeked out from behind my mother's skirts. Luther. He was 13 now, bigger than I remembered from portraits, eyes bright with curiosity. I crouched down and lifted him up, his arms looping around my neck without hesitation. Sister, he laughed. Serafina greeted my parents politely and followed us inside. Dinner was lavish. Luther sat beside Serafina, utterly enchanted. She cut his meat for him, slipped him extra sweets, murmuring, just one more bite, young lord. Don't tell your sister. I like you, Luther announced seriously. You're nicer than sister. Serafina smiled. Then I must be doing something right. I smiled too, but inside, panic growed in me. Every laugh felt like borrowed time. Every clink of cutlery was like a countdown. How do you confess treason of the heart to a duke? My father noticed. Evelyn, he said calmly. What troubles you? Before I could speak, Serafina shifted, Luther still seated comfortably on her lap. Sir, Evelyn and I have grown very close. Yes, yes, my father replied. We are grateful for your guidance. Sweat gathered at my temples. I stared into my plate, heart pounding loud enough to betray me. More than friends, sir, Serafina continued. Evelyn and I wish to be betrothed. Silence crashed down. My mother stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. Serafina gently set Luther down and stepped beside me, her presence shielding mine. My father raised his hand. Sit, he told my mother. Then his gaze cut into us. What about your engagement with the crown prince? After I didn't reply, father continued, what about children? What about the future? Without a man, there is no lineage, no protection. And you, his eyes flicked to Serafina, come from a fallen family. I stood. My legs trembled, but I bowed deeply. Father, forgive us. I do not wish to be wed to the crown prince, and we do not wish for children of our own. I will serve as an acting duchess until Luther comes of age. After that, Serafina and I will live by our own abilities. After a long silence, my father spoke. Fine, you both will remain under my protection, he said calmly. Until Luther comes of age and inherits the duchy. His gaze softened. And perhaps, until then, the nobles will finally stop pestering me about your marriage, Evelyn. My chest felt too tight. I nodded quickly, afraid my voice would break if I tried to speak. Serafina's hand brushed mine, enough to ground me. Later that night, when the corridors were quiet and the candles burned low, we finally had a moment alone. Do you think, I hesitated, fingers twisting together, your mother will accept us? Serafina didn't look away. Her expression didn't waver. In the original story, my father was described as a drunk who died early, she said softly. And my mother, she worked alone to raise me. She's not cruel, Evelyn. Then I want to meet her too. We decided to visit after a week. That week passed fast. When we weren't studying, we spent time with Luther. He followed us everywhere like a shadow, endlessly curious, endlessly affectionate. One afternoon, he came running in with a bundle of flowers clutched in his hands. Stay still, he ordered, standing on his toes to place a crooked flower crown on top of my head. Then he turned to Serafina and carefully tied a small bracelet of petals around her wrist. There, he declared proudly. Now you both look like fairies. Serafina and I laughed. We both leaned in and kissed Luther's cheeks at the same time. He froze, face turning bright red. Then he straightened with absolute seriousness. I will protect you, elder sister. And you too, new elder sister. Forever. Something inside me melted completely. When the day came to leave, the farewell was harder than I expected. My mother handed me a carefully packed food box, fingers lingering over mine. Eat properly on the road, she said gently. My father gave a simple nod. Luther hugged us both so tightly I thought he might never let go. And then, just like that, Serafina and I were back in a carriage again, rolling away from the duchy, towards her house this time. When the door opened, warmth spilled out like sunlight. Serafina's mother was gentle-looking, with tired eyes but a kind smile, the sort that made you feel welcomed before you'd even spoken. Her hands were rough from work, but when she held mine, her touch was careful. I learned pieces of her story in the novel, once a Marioness. Once surrounded by luxury, then by debts. The violence that no child should ever witness. How her husband had nearly struck little Serafina with a vase, but had fallen down the stairs by slipping and died. A miracle, perhaps, for mother and daughter. Yet despite everything, she had raised Serafina alone. Loved her, protected her. And still, something felt off. They spoke politely. Kindly. But there was distance there. Like two people afraid of touching an old wound. Later, while Serafina helped her mother in the kitchen, I wandered down the corridor. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I really didn't. But their voices drifted through the half-open door. So she was your love in your past life too, Lillian? Her mother asked gently. I froze. Lillian? I was lucky, Serafina replied, voice calm, almost nostalgic. Lucky to meet her again in this life. Again? My heart felt unstable. Would my Serafina have fallen for her too? Her mother asked. There was a pause. No, Auntie, Serafina said softly. She was meant to live as the empress. She deserved her happy ending with the prince. I heard the knife stop against the chopping board. Silence. Then Serafina's voice changed, lower, tender. I lost my parents young too, Auntie. Consider me your daughter as well. I stepped back without thinking, my shoulder slamming against the door. It banged loudly, the sound echoing down the corridor. I fled to the guest room and sat on the bed, staring at my hands. The door creaked open behind me. Serafina's footsteps were rushed. Evelyn, she asked gently. What's wrong? I didn't look at her. I couldn't. So, we knew each other before? The room went still. Yes, she admitted quietly. I finally lifted my head. Then tell me, I said, voice trembling despite my efforts. How did we meet? Serafina didn't answer right away. She sat beside me on the bed, close enough that our shoulders touched, but gentle, as if giving me space to pull away if I wanted. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was softer than I had ever heard it. We met in university, she said. Not here. Before this world. I held my breath. My name was Lillian then, she continued. And yours was Misty. You were sitting alone in the back row of the literature lecture, she said with a small smile. Hood up, earphones in, not to caring about anyone. But you were taking the neatest notes I'd ever seen. I dropped my pen, she went on. It rolled to your feet. You picked it up, handed it back, and said you should get one with a better grip. Your fingers will hurt after long essays. That was the first thing you ever said to me. I stared at her, stunned. That's when I fell in love, she admitted calmly. I saw you and my heart jumped to the moon. My chest felt too tight. We started studying together. You always claimed you preferred tablets over laptops, but you secretly loved laptops more. You said the keyboard sounded comforting. Her lips curved. You thought no one noticed. I didn't remember any of it. But my heart reacted as if it did. You loved affogato on stressful days, said the bitterness of coffee and sweetness of ice cream felt like a balance. And macchiato to make yourself happy. You'd pretend it was a coincidence, but I learned your patterns. You had this guidebook you trusted more than any professor. You highlighted everything in different colors and scolded me when I bent the pages. So I started copying notes from you instead. We weren't brave, not in that world. We were close. Too close for friends, not close enough to be honest. I thought, maybe if I waited, you'd choose me. She looked down at her hands. But you got sick, she said quietly. Very suddenly. Hospital rooms. The sound of machines instead of keyboards. I held your hand when you slept, told you about the weather. About the books you'd missed. About the coffee shop near campus that started selling a new dessert you would have liked. She swallowed. You never woke up. The silence that followed was heavy. I don't know why I woke up here, she said at last. Or why I remembered everything. But when I saw you in the academy for the first time, standing there, looking confused, I knew. It was you. Misty. Evelyn. Whatever world, whatever name. My eyes blurred before I realized I was crying. That's why I know what you like, she said gently. It's not because I'm clever. It's because I loved you long before this story ever began. I pressed my trembling hands into the bedsheets. So all this time, I murmured. All this time, she confirmed. The room felt too small for everything in my chest. Grief for a life I couldn't remember. Warmth for a love that had followed me across worlds. Confusion, fear, gratitude, all tangled together. Serafina reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Her fingers wrapped around mine. The exam season passed like a soft, steady tide instead of a storm. Serafina and I studied side by side, shared quiet snacks, traded tired smiles across stacks of books. Our parents knew. A few close friends knew. And somehow, everything went well. No dramatic tragedy. No cursed ending. No death flags snapping at my heels. Just peace. We both graduated with honors. The banquet hall shimmered with gold and crystal that night. Chandeliers like constellations. Silk dresses brushing against marble floors. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. When I looked at Serafina, my breath simply stopped. Her dress made her golden hair look like sunlight itself. She stood surrounded by admirers, voices overlapping in praise and laughter, and yet somehow her gaze kept drifting back to me. James appeared at my side with a dramatic sigh. I can't believe you stole my crush. I snorted into my drink. You're shameless. You were crushing on another woman while engaged. He pointed at me. You did the same. We stared at each other for a second, then both laughed. At least we're consistent, he said. With our taste in women, I finished. We clinked glasses in mutual surrender. Across the hall, Serafina finally stepped out of the circle around her. She bowed politely to the crown prince, excused herself with grace, and then without hesitation. Her hand slipped into mine. Come with me, she murmured. She led me through tall doors and onto the balcony, away from the music, away from the lights, where the moon was above us. The night air was cool. She lifted me gently by the waist and set me on top of the stone parapet carefully, as though I were something precious and fragile. I laughed softly at the absurdity of it, then looked up at the sky. The moon was beautiful. But when I turned back, I found Serafina wasn't looking at the moon at all. She was looking at me. Into my eyes, Eve, she whispered. Her lips met mine softly. Behind us, the music continued. The world kept running and the future waited, unwritten. And for the first time since I had woken up in this strange life, I felt certain of one thing: we both choose to love without restraints.